What's going on, everybody? This is the blockchain backer, bringing you the latest cryptocurrency news and analysis. Today, we're going to be talking about the Bitcoin price chart, along with the altcoin market and what we've been talking about this week. There's kind of two main topics that I want to touch on in this video, and that's one, what Bitcoin's price action could be up to, while also continuing to elaborate on the things we talked about earlier this week over here with the altcoin market, where we've discussed price action, the location that we're at, that the initial bounce down here would be a little bit convincing that there could be a reversal happening, but typically that's not the real bounce. And then, like we talked about in markets in the morning on Wednesday,
I think we're very, very close. If not, the bottom is already in. But like I put in today's video, and like I've already talked about here in markets in the morning, my speculation is that we actually do get the thing that spooks everybody. Something like that.
So I've kind of left those lines just kind of sitting on there from markets in the morning a couple of days ago. Price did move up. Price has started falling back. There hasn't really been much to say while it still sits here trying to do something like this. Bitcoin has taken another step down to the downside. Like I've mentioned, the picture for Bitcoin isn't as clear to me as the rest of content creation out there in the world, all pointing straight line up. I think it's far more complicated than that. We've gone through it and we've shown tons of on-chain stuff. We've written newsletters on this, that the on-chain activity all signals we're significantly deep into this thing, that things that are flashing on-chain in regards to profit taking that is happening is what happens when you're getting very, very close to an actual top being in. But one of the battles with something like this, when we're talking about the altcoin market doing something like this, that hey, it's going to come down here, it's going to set this new low. And well, I mean, what do we all want, right? Nobody just wants this thing to go back, do another retracement, and then we just do the whole thing all over again, right? Nobody wants that. We want it to keep going and to get into actual expansion, because we all know that's the problem that happened. We have not gone into expansion. This has been nothing more than a retrace happening for the market, and it got violently rejected by the 702 Fibonacci retracement in here. So part of me has to come to terms of being like, hey, look, if this market is going to hold right here, and if this thing is going to go off and go into expansion, thinking that Bitcoin's going to go straight line down doesn't really sit well with the idea of this thing holding and us actually being able to get into a real expansion, right? Essentially, we would probably need to see that level of euphoria get taken out and see euphoria re-enter the market once again. Essentially, see what we see at the end of every cycle, where retail finally pours into the market and buys the top. Sounds cruel to say, but it's what happens every time in every market. So how do we get our way up here, like all content and retail investors are cheering for, with us not being in something like this, which we sure look awfully similar to, where the peak of the euphoria was back here. This is an elevated retrace, and then it just keeps grinding down. And if you reflect back on what it was like back then, what was happening? It was the exact same thing, right? Retail investors scared to buy the dip, scared to buy the dip, scared to buy the dip. But in this one in here, there was no fear. The price kept going down, but retail, content creation, all tailored around price going up. Even though we were showing price was acting what it's like when you're an actual bear, during this whole period here in December, in January, the market was still convinced that Bitcoin was in a bull, but we knew Bitcoin was already in a bear. I wouldn't say it's as clear as day on that. We're going to talk about that, but I see that similarity in there, right? Retail euphoria, retail all convinced that this thing is just starting, and as this dip continues to progress along, retail keeps buying, thinking it's going to go up, which is the identical behavior of what we've had in these types of situations before. So of course, the thing you don't want is something like that happening once again, and that we're just continuing grinding down and down and down, and retail is buying, 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 thinking this thing is going to the moon, but it's acting like what happens when we've actually already topped. And so this is, of course, something to be keeping a close eye on right in here, as price behavior is resembling something very similar to that happening after euphoria came in. Then there's the retrace, and then things just start deteriorating, but retail continues to buy. That is what happened back in here in 2021, right? That happening does not bode well for this idea, right? There's really not much examples for us to look at in the market to say, hey, if that happens, Bitcoin just keeps crashing and everything else just goes to the upside. It's not usually how it works, right? We likely do need to see a reversal come out of here and see euphoria enter into the market. So things that we've talked about over the last couple of months have really been, again, that on-chain behavior of what happens when we reach excessive euphoria, and then when we also reach profit taking happening by large entities. And all those things triggered in here for Bitcoin. When we saw those things all trigger in 2017 and in 2021, there was still one more little push that came out of Bitcoin when we had all of these things get triggered off. Essentially, what happens is we set a new high on a bearish divergence of all on-chain activity, right? So that hasn't happened. And that's a little bit of a head scratcher. So how do we make this work? How do we get this thing to be able to go off, get up, and we have excessive euphoria come into the market? And that we get a couple of months of really kind of crazy wild action happening in the altcoin market. And I think structurally, we'd have to be seeing something very similar to what we saw happen at the actual peak of Bitcoin back in 2021, that we actually are more in something along the lines of like that. That we had, this first initial kind of sell off here. You see the kind of grinding up that happens in here. Then it just kind of violently pulls back, and then it violently whips back up to the upside. Obviously, the magnitude of these moves are all very different, but we kind of reach our extremes in here. We're making something that we'll talk about here in a minute. Everybody will start thinking is a head and shoulders happening up here at the top, and that we do find our way to get our excessive euphoria to happen right here. And then the altcoin market kind of continues to go kind of bonkers here into a moment like this. Now we can kind of go back and live there in March and April of 2021 and take a look what the price action looked like. I've cut off everything that takes place after April 7th of 2021 to see what the structure actually looked like at that time. So you can kind of get yourself a ballpark idea of what it looked like near the top of Bitcoin back in 2021 compared to what we are looking like right now. What does Bitcoin end up doing? It ends up reversing, going up, and then boom, it sets the high, and that was the end of the market. It was over. But going back to live in that moment, again, what did it look like? What did people think was going on? Hey, what do we have here? We got ourselves nice little gorgeous head and shoulders starting to show up in here, which was looking something along the lines of this whole thing in here. There you go. And when you measure out a head and shoulders, of course, you measure the length of the head to the neckline. And so, of course, Bitcoin doesn't actually end up getting that high, even for a cup and handle structure. One of the misconceptions that was happening is that people were using the size of the cup rather than the size of the handle. But even in this, we're supposed to be using the handle, which gives us the magnitude of which we can actually end up moving up in here. So what does price end up doing? Again, we get our play out to happen in here. We go off, boom, and then game over. But what ends up playing out in the market next, right? Reflecting back on it and what it was like back in April and back in May, right? This is when we're having Dogecoin euphoria. This is where we're having Elon Musk on Saturday Night Live. This is where all the craziness is happening. And Elon Musk goes on to Saturday Night Live right here, Saturday, May 8th. So really all the excessive insanity of the altcoin market all takes place in this stuff right in here. Even though there's really nothing left to happen over here for Bitcoin, this is how the ending all plays out. So what would that mean in the event of something like this happening right in here? Well, it would likely mean, hey, we're getting pretty close to a reversal starting to show up in here, and then comes the crazy excessiveness, right? Kind of get an ABC correction happening in here, ABC, that we can see here, ABC, and then the euphoria ends up coming in, and the excessive craziness ends up coming in here, right? Which would mean we're getting really close to a bottom before it gets absolutely nuts, right? Well, that would corroborate this. That would corroborate that we're finding a bottom, and then in comes the excessive euphoria and the craziness and the wildness ends up happening. Bitcoin sets a new high, just barely. Altcoins go bonkers. Bitcoin tops. It goes back into a retrace. Altcoins still continue acting like madness throughout that whole time period. Boom, then it's all over, lights out. Off into a recession we go likely, right? So when I imagine it being like something like this, I would think that would have to be kind of along the lines of what is happening. That Bitcoin would need to be finding some type of bottom coming in here pretty soon to then start bringing in that excessive, crazy narratives all over again. Hey, we just had the halving. Can you believe we're doing this? It's just starting. But it'd be really kind of reaching the end here. It's just This has just been long distribution happening over here for Bitcoin with retail really excited about it the whole time, right? But obviously, what we can't have for any of that to happen is for this to be the circumstance of what is actually going on in here. And that Bitcoin's already deteriorating. Things are going down. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is doing exactly what it's done before the great financial crisis. The DXY is back to threatening the historical danger level of 106 again. And this thing is just doomed happening in here. For me, playing with Bitcoin is not interesting to me. Percentage-wise, I'm just not interested in chasing it going barely into a new all-time high. Even if it doubled the all-time high, it still just isn't that interesting to me. All of my interest is really over here on the altcoin market and whether it can recover, because mathematically, the data suggests that is where the percentages are. Believe it or not, even when it comes to total value locked, developer activity, all those metrics that we look at, Bitcoin still underperformed. I would suspect it to be the case as well if this thing goes into recovery. We're talking much bigger percentages here in the altcoin market if we actually do see a recovery happen in the cryptocurrency market. So where are we at, right? We're talking about the complications of Bitcoin. I've been pretty vocal. I don't see what everybody else is seeing in regards to this just being the beginning. I either see it's just the start of the end or that maybe you got one little push left happening in here. But the main focus for me has been, ever since taking all the profits back at the retracement levels for the altcoin market and trying to play this thing along in here and tweeting along the journey of, hey, get down into the YOLO zone. After the stops get shifted, after buying the low, right? How am I going to play this? I've done a good job preserving all the capital that was taken away from the retracement levels. And now it's about, all right, I'm thinking about re-entering all of it, but trying to figure out how do I battle these two things that are going on in my head of what I see happening in crypto. That either one, Bitcoin's got that thing to go, or two, the death spiral is already put into place and in motion currently right now. So I'll let you know how it's going in my head on how I'm thinking about this right now. Again, this is not financial advice. I'm not an investment advisor, blah, blah, blah. Make your own decisions. Do whatever you want. I'm a dude on the internet who has an idea, and this is what I'm thinking about doing. The entries that were made down here at the bottom on Saturday, April 14th, most of them have been stopped out as we've pulled down in here. Like I had tweeted, when these entries were made, 20% was actually taken out right in here to ensure that this would become risk-free, which was tweeted right here on April 15th, risk managing by selling 20% with stops below Saturday's low. That's on April 15th, so the stops below Saturday's low. Then on the 19th, stating that I've moved the stops even higher. Well, now that it's down into this area that I've deemed to be my YOLO once settled zone, I actually have re-entry stops set way up here. That if this market surprises me and goes shooting through here, I get stopped back into them. I get pulled back into the market. The capital gets pulled right back in. It's pretty uncomfortable for me because it's so far away. For a lot of assets, that's a good 20%, 30% to the upside before it gets there. And having to wait for a market to go up 20 or 30%, miss that whole move, and then finally it gets and hits my stops and I buy it after the move has already gone way up. That's a little uncomfortable, but it's kind of where I have to be right now to feel comfortable with the whole structure that's even going on with the crypto market right now. It essentially becomes a wash. Entries are made here. Stops happen in here. I got re-entered right back into close to where I got stopped out at. And it just becomes kind of a wash in here. And I know this may sound complicated, but this is just how the risk management had to be done. If we can actually see the altcoin market shift right back down to these lows, I will take all of these stops that sit up here and I actually will shift them down now to be right here at the high that was just set yesterday. That if we go take out yesterday's high, I will get stopped into the market there. Now, right now, all those stops still sit there. The only way I move these stops down here to this level is if we do see this market get down here to the low. If we pull back down to the low, I will then take the stops from here and shift them down to here, to the Thursday high, yesterday's high. Then I sit and wait for what typically happens, and that we hang out here and then something happens that flushes the low. Then I want to see the market come back and settle. And at that point, I will take this stop away. I will buy the market all throughout here and then shift the stop loss to the downside of that low, because now I'll be back in the market and I'll shift the stops to below the low. So right now, I have a large cash position. It gets pulled back in. If we go firing to the upside, if we pull back down to the lows here again, I take those stop losses to be re-entered back into the market down to here, to where if the market breaks to the upside from here, all my positions get bought back. But as we sit here and wait, I will look for one last flush to spook the market and then a recovery from that flush. And at that point, I'm YOLO once settled, because that will be the settling for me. And I'll put all my stop losses below that flush and then just sit back and enjoy the show. And now there are some assets where I'm already starting to feel comfortable with doing that. For example, like with Cardano, it got up, it's already pulled back pretty close down to the low. I don't think it's any surprise that I own Cardano. It's one of my top holdings. So this is one I'm feeling more comfortable with moving my stop down already on Cardano. Same goes for like Polkadot over here, but maybe not as much over here on Chainlink. So it's kind of a process that I'm just kind of gradually starting to get into, but the vast majority of them have still not been moved. So, examples of that happening are just like we see here. You see kind of this 5-wave structure, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Everybody thinks that's the bottom, but it's not. You get the flush back down, right? We get back down near the lows, and then we get that final flush to go take out that lows, and then we come back and settle. Or like here in the case of Bitcoin, right? We come back to the lows, take out the low, and then come back and settle. And then that's it, right? So conceptually, that's what I'm looking for to happen in here. Something along the lines of like this and this, after we've already kind of had a move happen like that, which we were expecting over here in the altcoins. And now trying to work that way back down, And hopefully that's it. That's the bottom. We're done. And that all the Bitcoin mega bulls get what they're cheering for. And that it's not something that gets really ugly. Either way, that's what I'm looking at. That's what my idea is. That's the way I'm kind of playing it right now. And I kind of walked you through all the different steps of what's going on in my mind. So you may need to rewatch that a couple of times to get where I'm at. And so, one of those things, of course, that keeps me uneasy at the same time is the United States stock market and where it's at. We haven't seen expansion happen in the stock market. This has been incredibly isolated to pretty much NVIDIA controlling the whole show of the US stock market. We've got the Dow Jones doing really exactly what it's done before things get ugly. So at the same time, I'm over here. I am entering hedges over here in the United States stock market. This week, I've opened up a couple of options contracts over there on NVIDIA. I bought puts with expirations for November 15th with a 138 strike and a $132 strike. Anybody before me who has attempted to short NVIDIA has gotten those shorts absolutely obliterated. There's a high probability that could also happen to me as well. But fortunately, so far, they are in the money right now. But one thing we'll be watching for, of course, is we'll continue watching the stock market, make sure we don't get a play out like this to happen over here in the Dow. We'll make sure we're not getting some type of 106 escaping happening over here on the United States dollar currency index. And in the event that we start seeing things like that, where we start seeing the Dow start to go into deterioration, and if we see the DXY start breaking through the danger zone and start going off in here, likely a bad sign for Bitcoin and the altcoin market at that time, right? So we have a lot of things to be watching in here, but I think I kind of gave you the real recap on how I'm playing it and how my mind is looking at it through those different lenses, and how I'm trying to protect my capital, but also not miss out in the event that the market does do that. Because in the event that that ends up happening, this was the best part of the whole crypto market, this whole time period right in here. The final leg for Bitcoin and the retrace for Bitcoin, that's the most exciting time for a market in the crypto market, especially for the altcoins. So not that much for Bitcoin, but it was the best part for the altcoin market. And of course, I don't want to miss that. So I've kind of given you the clear kind of blueprint on how I'm playing it in here. So I expect we'll probably see some action happening here in the coming days. There's even a chance here. I'll have to check in with you guys over the weekend. If we get back down to these lows again right here, I will check in with you over the weekend. But it's a pretty exciting time right now because there's a very reasonable chance this is the bottom forming right in here. So I hope you kind of like looking at it through that lens, looking at it through the way I'm thinking about it, showing you kind of the examples of how I'm thinking about it, why I'm talking about the low, I'm talking about the next flush. We're coming back to the low and then that little flush happening in there and then settling, right? The whole settle discussion happening in here. And that's what that would look like. That's what settling would look like to me. So, all right. Let's get this weekend going, guys. I hope that you've had a great week. Happy Friday to everybody. Thank you all so much for tuning into my channel and watching. If you're looking for something to do throughout the weekend, I highly recommend checking out the newsletter that was published here just a few days ago. It comes with a 32-minute audio recording, and we deep dived into a lot of the data on the different coins and what different traits mattered when it came to total value lock, developer activity, and all those different metrics. Those are the things that I'm focusing on as we're entering into this moment. Otherwise, if videos are more your thing, you can check out bcbacker.com with over 40 videos and 11 hours of content, deep diving into the historical behavior of the cryptocurrency market and teaching you how to set up your own charts and indicators within TradingView and CoinTrader Pro. There's links in the descriptions of all of my videos to bcbacker.com and to the newsletter there at blockchainbacker.substack.com. All right, that's going to be it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you could, please like the video and give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can be notified of when I create new content and when I go live. As always, this is not investment advice and I am not a financial advisor. But if you ever need a pick-me-up or a little bit of reassurance, just remember that the blockchain backers got your back. Have a good one.